Long before anyone ever searched for lost episodes or whispered about canceled stories, there was a silence on the island of Sodor that most never noticed. It lived in the spaces between official records, between approved scripts and cheerful endings. It lived in a forgotten archive room where time moved slower and memories gathered dust. On one quiet morning, the Fat Controller walked into that room alone. No engines followed him, no paperwork demanded his attention. The door closed behind him with a soft echo, and for a moment he simply stood there, listening to the stillness. Sunlight slipped through a narrow window, cutting a thin golden line through the air. Dust floated lazily, as if even it was reluctant to move. He knew exactly where he was going. His hand hovered over a shelf that had not been touched in years. When he finally pulled out the heavy, leather-bound book, its weight surprised even him. The cover was cracked, its edges worn smooth by time, and stamped across the front was a word that felt heavier than iron: rejected. This was not just a book, it was a graveyard of ideas. Inside were stories that had been written with care, imagined with hope, and abandoned with finality. Stories about Thomas the Tank Engine that were never allowed to exist beyond ink and sketches. As the book opened, the sound of the pages turning felt louder than it should have been. Each page carried typewritten words, crossed-out lines, margin notes, and hand-drawn illustrations. One sketch showed Thomas the Tank Engine, but something about him felt different. His expression was quieter, thoughtful, almost uncertain. This Thomas the Tank Engine did not smile for the camera. He looked like someone who knew the world was more complicated than it appeared. These were the lost episodes, the stories that were canceled forever. The first pages shimmered into a world that felt softer than reality. Twilight settled over Sodor as Thomas the Tank Engine rolled slowly along mist-covered tracks beside Percy. Fireflies drifted through the air, glowing gently like tiny stars. The world felt hushed, as if it were holding its breath. Ahead, an old signal lamp glowed with warm, golden light. Thomas the Tank Engine slowed, his eyes drawn upward. Inside the glass, something moved. A tiny fairy formed from pure light, her wings delicate and bright, trapped behind the glass. Her eyes were filled with sadness, not fear. She reached out, pressing her hand gently against the barrier, as if she could feel Thomas the Tank Engine watching her. This story was gentle. It was about kindness, about helping someone who didn't belong, about believing in something magical, even when the world insisted it wasn't real. Thomas the Tank Engine wanted to help her. Percy wanted to help her. For a moment, it felt like they would, but then the page turned and the warmth vanished. In an office far removed from the forest, the storyboard lay on a desk. The title read, "The Fairy of the Road." A hand came down hard, stamping the page in red. Rejected. Too strange, too magical, too different. The fairy never escaped the lamp. She faded, not into sparkles, but into obscurity. The next story was darker. The Diesel Works appeared under a gray sky, cold and echoing. Diesel stood alone on a forgotten siding, oil dripping slowly from his frame, each drop hitting the ground with a quiet, lonely sound. In this story, Diesel was not scheming, he was not cruel, he was tired of being alone. Then Daniel the kind tank engine arrived. Painted in soft cream and maroon, shy and unsure, he hesitated before rolling forward. He didn't know if he was welcome. Diesel saw something familiar in him, someone who didn't quite fit where he was told to belong. They ran together at night, headlamps cutting through fog, stars watching silently above. Diesel protected Daniel the kind tank engine from mocking voices. For the first time, Diesel wasn't the villain. He was a friend. But somewhere, someone decided this version of Diesel was wrong. Diesel was not allowed to be kind, not allowed to be gentle. The script was crossed out, the notes harsh and final. Rejected. Daniel the kind tank engine vanished into the fog, never to return. Diesel was left behind, exactly where the world expected him to be. Another page turned, heavier than the last. Storm clouds gathered over the main line, the wind howled. Thomas the tank engine was not there this time. Henry was. He raced toward a mountain pass, steam billowing, speed increasing. A warning sign flashed red. Danger. Falling rocks. In this story, the warning mattered. The rocks came down in slow motion. Sparks flew. The impact was violent and sudden. Henry's face froze in fear, not cartoonish, not exaggerated, but real. The aftermath was quiet. Henry lay broken on the tracks, steam leaking weakly into the cold air. Gordon watched from a distance, unable to help, unable to speak. In the steamworks, Henry was wrapped in bandages and supports. Mechanics moved carefully, their motions slow, keeled gestures. This story wasn't about shock, it was about pain, recovery, consequences. And then the budget appeared. A red circle, a number too large. The storyboard was torn down and thrown away. Rejected. Henry's accident was deemed too costly, too heavy, too real. The next pages gleamed with light and speed. Angelica, the silver streak engine, arrived at Croven's gate, sunlight reflecting off her polished silver body, red stripes blazing as she rolled in. Thomas the tank engine watched her in awe. Gordon and James watched her with envy. She was everything Sodor had never seen before. When the bridge cracked beneath James, Angelica, the silver streak, didn't hesitate. She raced forward, faster than any engine had ever gone, saving him at the last second. The moment was heroic, unforgettable. But in a quiet meeting room, her toy prototype sat on a table. Too complex, too expensive. Heads shook slowly. Rejected. Angelica, the silver streak, drove off into the light, her story ending before it ever truly began. Then came the story that changed the tone entirely. The ground trembled, metal footsteps echoed from the fog. Mecha Diesel emerged from a towering, mechanical, red eyes glowing with menace. Thomas the tank engine stood small in front of him. But this was not a story about strength, it was about intelligence. Thomas watched, planned, thought. He lured Mecha Diesel toward an old turntable, rusted and weak. The metal strained, sparks flew. The machine was too heavy. Strategy won over power. The projector hummed as the reel played, and then it stopped. The screen went dark. The fat controller shook his head. Rejected. Mecha Diesel powered down forever. As the book neared its end, the lost characters began to fade. The fairy dissolved into light. Daniel, the kind tank engine, disappeared into fog. Angelica, the silver streak, vanished into brightness. Mecha Diesel fell silent. None of them failed. They were simply never allowed to succeed. The book closed with a soft thud. The archive room returned to silence. Outside, the world moved on. In the present, Thomas the tank engine smiled on screens, bright and cheerful. On sunny tracks, Thomas the tank engine and Percy laughed together, as if none of these stories had ever existed. But somewhere they did. In a quiet room, a small Thomas the tank engine toy sat beside an open notebook. A pen hovered over a blank page, waiting. What story should be written next? At dawn, Thomas the tank engine rested peacefully in Tidmouth Sheds, calm, wise, hopeful, carrying every untold story forward, not as lost episodes, but as possibilities. Because stories that are canceled forever are never truly gone. They are only waiting to be told again.
Yes, he thought he was pulling the express.
What story should we write next?